Hi, thanks for watching episode number 128 of the Doctor Podcast Show, and I'm your host, Dr. Robert Cykiert. Please subscribe and follow Doctor Podcast. I'd really appreciate it, and it'll help us get more great guests for the Doctor Podcast Show in the future. Please also like, repost, and share this important episode. Today's show topic is something that you hear about every day on TV, and it's all over the internet, and that is the subject of GLP-1 or semaglutide drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, and Rybelsus. They're extremely effective for weight loss and treating diabetes, but today we're going to discuss a new, very important use for Rybelsus that was just approved by the FDA recently. We'll also discuss a new study on semaglutide that was just published in one of the top medical journals in the world, and is something you need to know. To discuss all of that, we have one of the world's leading experts on these drugs. And our expert today is Dr. John Buse. Dr. Buse, a distinguished professor of medicine at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He's a leading expert in diabetes and cardiovascular disease and has been instrumental in advancing the understanding and treatment of type 2 diabetes. Dr. Buse served as the co-chair of the SOUL clinical trial, that's SOUL, SOUL clinical trial, which investigated the cardiovascular benefits of Rybelsus, which is an oral form of the GLP-1 or semaglutide drugs. And that's in adults with type 2 diabetes and who also have cardiovascular or heart disease and or chronic kidney disease. His work has significantly contributed to the evidence base for new therapeutic options, including the recent FDA approval expanding the use of Rybelsus. So Dr. Buse, thanks for joining us today and updating us on these important topics and developments. Really appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks. So can you briefly explain what Rybelsus is and what was the purpose of this clinical trial, the SOUL clinical trial?
Yeah. So Rybelsus is an oral formulation of semaglutide, the same drug that's in Wegovy and Ozempic. Wegovy is the weight loss injected form, and Ozempic is the diabetes injected form. Semaglutide is a protein, a peptide. And so if you just ate semaglutide, it would be digested like steak and would never enter the body. And what the Rybelsus tablet does is it packages the semaglutide with a buffer and something that helps to get the peptide across the stomach lining. But it only works if people take the Rybelsus on an empty stomach, first thing in the morning, with a small swallow of water, just 4 ounces, and nothing else. No coffee, no brushing your teeth, no other tablets, no food, nothing. Just that small swallow of water for at least a half an hour. And that allows because the stomach is really like a virtual space. It's kind of flat when it's empty. So when you take the Rybelsus with just that small swallow of water, it kind of nestles into the nooks and crannies of the stomach and is able to be absorbed. If you fill up the stomach, then it's like a big bag and the Rybelsus is just going to flop around and it basically turns into meat and is not absorbed. So it's a pretty slick tablet. To put things into context, the big dose of Ozempic is 2 milligrams. The big dose of Wegovy is 2.4 milligrams, but that's once a week. And the top dose available today of Rybelsus is 14 milligrams,
Wow.
but that's every day. So it's only, despite the fact that all these things have been done to make it better absorbed, it's not very well absorbed. So it's about 1-2% absorbed. And the only other thing I'd say about it is once it's into the body, it's just like Ozempic and Wegovy. Now, the reason we needed to do the SOUL trial, there was a small study, it's called a safety study, done with oral semaglutide or Rybelsus a number of years ago, but it was small. It was impressive. There was more than 20% reduction in the risk of heart attack, stroke, or cardiovascular death. But it was surprisingly impressive, but not really designed to take advantage of that impressive result. And so they needed to do a bigger study and to get the indication from the Food and Drug Administration. And so SOUL was the big study to see if oral semaglutide or Rybelsus really reduced the risk of heart attack, stroke, and cardiovascular death.
Wow. So it reduces the risk of getting a heart attack and a stroke, which are the two leading killers in the USA, right?
Right. So to be technical about this, the way these studies are done, it was the time to the first occurrence of a heart attack, a stroke, or cardiovascular death. So we kind of lump three outcomes together. It wasn't powered, even though it had 10,000 patients and it went for 4 years.
Wow.
It's not powered to look individually at heart attacks, strokes, and cardiovascular death. But the trend was in the right direction for all of them. Overall, it was a 14% reduction in the risk of heart attack, stroke, and cardiovascular death. And just to put that in perspective, there have been others of these cardiovascular outcome trials with Ozempic and Wegovy, and now with Manjaro, and before with Trulicity, and before with Victoza, and before with Bydureon. So there have been many of these cardiovascular outcome trials. If you take all of them together and get what the average result is, it's 14%. So the SOUL
Hmm.
trial did exactly what all the other trials did. Now, the reason I was a little bit nervous as one of the co-leaders of this trial is because it was 10,000 people for 4 years. This was a very expensive trial to do. Uh, and what I hoped is that patients would take the medicine the right way, because this medicine, if you don't take it the right way, you might as well just throw it in the toilet. So if patients weren't good about taking the medicine, we would not have seen a benefit. So the first thing that's important to realize is not only does Rybelsus work, Rybelsus with its current instructions, if people are properly educated about it and reminded at their visits, it should produce blood sugar lowering in the setting of diabetes, weight loss, and provide for cardiovascular benefit.
Wow. Now, this study, the SOUL trial, that was in patients who have diabetes already?
Yeah, so the SOUL trial was people with diabetes and cardiovascular disease or chronic kidney disease. And the reason why we lump cardiovascular disease and chronic kidney disease together, they're the two, well, they're two related complications in people with diabetes, and people with chronic kidney disease are at extreme risk of cardiovascular disease. So they're considered sort of a cardiovascular risk equivalent. So these people were at very high risk of having a heart attack, stroke, or dying of cardiovascular disease.
Right. So a 14% reduction is huge in that population, which is at high risk of getting those problems, right?
Right. And, particularly impressive because these people almost all were on statins, which lower cardiovascular risk. They almost all were on aspirin, which lowers cardiovascular risk in people who've had prior cardiovascular disease. They were almost all on blood pressure medications, including the ones that specifically reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. So they were very well treated for their cardiovascular risk. And nevertheless, they still had additional lowering of cardiovascular risk. They
That,
were,
yeah,
yeah,
that's very important because these patients are already optimally treated with every medication. So the adding of Rybelsus reduced it 14% more, right?
right. And then the other thing is there's another class of diabetes medications that's associated with cardiovascular benefit. These are so-called SGLT2 inhibitors. We love to have letters and numbers in our drug class names in diabetes. So that's drugs like Jardiance, Farxiga, Invokana. Um, they've been shown to reduce cardiovascular risk and heart failure and kidney disease. So we had a fair number of people in the trial that were on these SGLT2 inhibitors because people had cardiovascular disease and kidney disease. And the people that got the Rybelsus, as opposed to those people who got placebo tablets, and nobody knew what they got. Those people who got the Rybelsus, probably because their blood sugar went down, they stopped their SGLT2 inhibitor more because they felt like they didn't need it. And the people that got placebo, they started SGLT2 inhibitors more. So the deck was kind of stacked against the Rybelsus because they got less of this more effective drug. But nevertheless, we showed that with the Rybelsus, whether or not people were on SGLT2 inhibitors, they seemed to derive the same benefit from taking Rybelsus. So it works, seems to work even on top of the other diabetes drugs that are good for heart disease.
That's great. And this was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, probably the top medical journal in the world, right?
Yeah, certainly the top medical journal in the United States.
In the USA, right? That's pretty amazing. Now, just from your experience in treating patients like this, what's the compliance rate with a patient doing the right thing with the Rybelsus, meaning they just take it with some water and wait half an hour before they eat? Do you find that people can comply with that, or it's easier to just give them the injectable forms of Ozempic and Wegovy?
Yeah, this is kind of a funny story. So I would say people that come to me having been treated with Rybelsus before in the community, I would say maybe 1 in 5 are taking the drug correctly on a regular basis. It really takes some talking to. And so instead of just saying, well, take it with 4 ounces, telling them the story, if they don't do it that way, they should just throw it in the toilet, cut your losses. Um, what I tell patients is if they can't take it the right way that day, because let's say they forgot and they already had their coffee, just
Right.
don't take it. Wait until the next day. The drug has a half-life of 7 days. So the drug, once it's in the body, lasts a long time. But we need to take it every day to build up the levels. If you miss one tablet, or if you take one tablet improperly, it's the same thing. It's not going to add to the amount of drug in your body. So you might as well keep the tablet because it's pretty expensive and not take it wrong. So, I mean, I tend to talk in detail to patients, and then every visit for the patients on Rybelsus. And there are other medicines like this. Synthroid or levothyroxine, a thyroid hormone, needs to be taken first thing in the morning by itself on an empty stomach. And if you don't take it right, I won't be able to figure out how to manage your Synthroid or your Rybelsus. So I talk to every patient at every visit about tell me exactly how you're taking it. And they tell me they take it with a swallow of water. And then I said, and then what do you do? And sometimes people say, well, then I go downstairs and I have my coffee. I go, no, 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 can't have your coffee, So it's really important to ask questions about this. But I would say that in my practice, people are pretty good at taking it. I do think many people choose to take the injected semaglutide instead because they just sort of feel like maybe net, it's easier than doing this stuff of taking the tablet and waiting at least a half an hour. Now,
Right.
one other thing I'd like to mention though, if you wait an hour, or 2 hours, it's absorbed even better. And so you may
Oh,
be able to get away with fewer tablets. And that's a trick we play sometimes when people have a hard time getting their diabetes medications covered fully by insurance plans. Is just
mhm.
tell them, or even what I tell them is, have dinner relatively early, like 6 p.m. It's okay to drink after dinner, but don't eat any food after dinner. So then your stomach is going to be empty by 2 o'clock in the morning. When you wake up in the middle of the night to pee, which almost every older patient with diabetes and heart disease does,
Right.
uh, take the Rybelsus then with the swallow of water and just go back to bed.
Well, that's a
And
good idea.
right. And so, and then, if you don't wake up to pee, just don't take it. Right. You don't have to take it every day. It's about, getting the exposure over a week. So anyway, I think my patients do pretty well, but, obviously I spend a fair amount of time educating them about how to do it properly.
Right. You need to keep reminding them.
Yeah.
I notice you pronounce it semaglutide, and I've been saying semaglutide. Which is the correct one, or are both pronunciations correct?
I think both pronunciations are correct. I'm a old school guy, so we started our first drug was called exenatide, and our second drug was called liraglutide, and so that's how I got kind of into that semaglutide thing. But I do think most people do pronounce it semaglutide.
Oh, all right. It's the same drug, though, so that's important. Now,
Yeah.
with every drug, and especially new drugs, safety is a big concern for many people considering medications. What did the SOUL trial reveal about the safety of Rybelsus, especially in terms of side effects or risks of the drug?
Yeah, basically the same as we've known from other semaglutide studies. So GI or stomach issues are the biggest problem, nausea and vomiting. It's usually mild to moderate, usually in the beginning when you first start the drug. Uh, uh, the tablets are 3 milligrams, 7 milligrams, 14 milligrams. There's a 20 plus milligram tablet that's under review at the FDA that may be available soon. But anyway, as you go from dose to dose, sometimes there's a little bit of recurrence. But the people who are really bothered about it by it usually have most of their trouble in the beginning, and then it tends to get better over time. And for most people, it just goes away. About 40% of people have at least one episode of nausea. About 15% of people have at least one episode of vomiting, over 6 months or a year. So it's not like everybody gets it. Some people get some sort of queasy belly. Constipation is the problem that I find is the showstopper for people, who get past the first week more than anything else. Some people get diarrhea. Um, what it does is it works in the brain to enhance satiety is the word, which is kind of related to appetite. It's sort of the opposite. Appetite is what you have before a meal, and satiety is that feeling full after a meal. This really does more for satiety, but sometimes it makes you feel satiated or have satiety even before the meal. So it kind of cuts your appetite that way. Um,
Mhm.
and one thing that definitely is a problem, if people are sort of they eat very quickly, they gulp their food down, sometimes that satiety signal doesn't kick in fast enough, and so they feel completely stuffed, like when you've completely overdone it at Thanksgiving. Um, and that sometimes brings on nausea. So I always talk to patients, whether they're taking tirzepatide or semaglutide or any of these drugs, to definitely start with smaller meals. Just serve yourself less food, to eat slowly and chew it thoroughly, and then to after each bite to think to yourself, am I feeling full? Am I feeling full? And definitely once you feel full, you're not hungry anymore, stop eating. Some people have to eat more meals a day, and frankly, what they have is they have more appetite because they're losing weight and they're eating less calories. But they have to, they don't eat very much with a meal, but then they might get hungry 3 hours later. But that's okay. If you ate very little at
Right.
lunch, you can have a snack at 4 p.m. And then, some people end up being not very hungry at supper, and maybe they get hungry at bedtime. So people have to sort of adapt to that, but avoiding eating when you're already feeling full. And then the concern that's probably out there the most now is that people lose muscle mass. The
Mhm.
best studies suggest that the muscle that you lose with these GLP-1 based drugs is the same amount of muscle that you would lose if you went on a diet, just ate less. The reason why you need less muscle is you're not moving around as much bulk. Literally, with the same amount of activity, you're going to burn less calories. You need less strength. So the body adapts by reducing muscle.
Good point.
And
Right.
right. But some people I do think lose too much muscle, and those are people who don't eat enough protein and don't get any exercise. And I think the people who don't eat enough protein and don't get enough exercise are often people who lose weight too fast. So we try and dose the drug instead of just going up as fast as we can, which we used to do with the older drugs, going up very slowly. And as long as people are losing a pound a week of weight, just staying with that dose. And, if they get down to just losing a pound a month, maybe then it's time, and they still need to lose more weight, then it's time to go up on the dose. Because when you lose weight really quickly, it's hard for people to eat enough protein to avoid muscle loss. And that amount of protein, the number we use is 1 gram per kilogram per day. So a 220 pound person is 100 kilograms. They need to eat 100 grams of protein a day to really not have the diet be part of of the loss of muscle mass, and try to exercise. And again, if you lose weight too fast, you just feel so weak and tired, it's hard to exercise. But you do want to get both cardio and weight training if you can
Right.
when you're using these drugs.
So what percentage of patients would you say have to stop the drug because of the side effects being extremely annoying or unbearable for them?
I think with the right counseling about limiting the portion sizes and all that kind of stuff,
Mhm.
probably 95% of people can take it,
Wow.
can get to an effective dose. I think there are maybe another 5% who have a little bit of kind of ongoing issues with nausea who, after 2 years or after a year, after 4 years, they just say, look, I'm tired of having these spells of nausea. I'm going to quit. But I'd say in the community with less counseling, and then me personally, I think particularly people who have tried these compounding pharmacy preparations and gotten basically no counseling,
Mm.
I think their, quit rates of 20% or more are common. You might read in the newspaper that after a year, only 50% of people are taking the drug after starting it. I think a lot of that is problems with health insurance and switching insurance schemes and that kind of stuff. And so we also spend a lot of time counseling people about, how are they going to afford this medicine, how we can get access to these medicines, which is getting better.
Right. So it's very effective. Sounds like it's very safe. Have you seen any really serious adverse side effects that might land somebody in the hospital or something like that?
Well, there are some things that are in the package insert. So when we do these clinical trials, we ask patients at every visit, anything untoward happened since the last visit. Whatever they say, we write down. And
Right.
that ends up in the package insert of the drug, saying these are the side effects. Now, when you look at placebo, you also get side effects. So something that's in the
Right.
package insert that is a terrible thing when it happens, and it happens to people with diabetes, is something called pancreatitis, inflammation of the
Mm.
pancreas. Very painful, in its worst form, just horrible pain that goes on for days and weeks. Thankfully, most of the cases that are reported with the GLP-1 drugs tend to be mild and relatively short, still not pleasant.
Right.
But importantly, in these trials like SOUL, in the big trials where they're placebo controlled, there doesn't seem to be really any increased risk of pancreatitis. So that's one which is kind of on the fence whether that's really a problem for these drugs or not. The second one that's quite worrisome is sometimes the slowing down of the GI tract with vomiting and constipation gets to be really bad. And there are people who've needed procedures basically to get rid of the constipation.
Mm.
They have bowel obstructions. Again, very uncommon, unclear whether that's directly related to the drug. Probably is, but the provider needs to help patients. Patients need to tell doctors, look, man, I am just not pooping when I take this drug, and we have to do some poop engineering to make sure people uh, don't get completely plugged up.
Like stool softeners and things like
And
that.
actually, the thing I find more effective is things like milk of magnesia, and some people just have to do it once a week to poop. And then the other thing that has become a more recent concern is eye problems. It is well known that if you take people with poorly controlled diabetes who are at risk of having eye disease anyway, and you improve their blood sugar control very rapidly, that sometimes their eye disease just kind of blows up. And this is the GLP-1 drugs are the most effective drugs on the planet for controlling diabetes. And so we try and make sure that their eye disease is well controlled before we put them on the drug.
Right.
And that seems to have largely mitigated the main or the eye problem that we've known about for some time. There's a new eye problem called NAION. It's a long acronym. Um,
Yeah,
very
I'm an
rare.
ophthalmologist, so I'm aware of it. It's non-arteritic ischemic optic neuropathy, basically
Exactly.
reduction of blood flow to the optic nerve. But it hasn't been proven that these drugs cause that. It's just an association,
Right.
and many of the patients are in an age group and a disease group where they're prone to that. So it's not clear
Right.
yet.
And it's so rare that from the clinical trials, we really don't have much insight into it. But so people are concerned about potential eye complications. So I think the main thing is if patients have issues with their GI tract, with their stomach, with their bowels, they need to let their doctors know. If they have problems with their vision, they need to let their doctor know. The one thing that is for sure, there are more gallbladder events,
Mm.
people that need their gallbladder taken out. That's true for essentially all weight loss therapies, including diet and exercise. There's something about losing weight that tends to cause more gallbladder sludge and stones that just plug up the gallbladder, and you need to have it surgically removed.
Right. So you have to weigh those side effects compared to the huge benefits of the drugs.
Right. And that's an important consideration, right? So I do think for the, 25-year-old who, wants to look extra good for the wedding that they're going to in a month or two, just need to be aware this is a drug, and some people have serious side effects. And so the benefit is pretty fleeting if you're going to take it for a month to get thin for a wedding.
Right.
And personally, I do not support people doing that. I think if you have diabetes or you have medical problems or you know trouble with self-confidence, et cetera. I mean, real issues with overweight or obesity, there is enough benefit where, you could consider taking these drugs. But if it's a sort of a silly idea, you definitely shouldn't do it.
All right. Now, how does this new approval position for Rybelsus as a drug that reduces major cardiovascular events, how does that put in a category for treating diabetes? Should it be the first line drug for treating diabetes in view of the cardiovascular benefits?
So what the American Diabetes Association says is that these drugs should be used in people with diabetes who have cardiovascular disease, independent of how well controlled their diabetes is or what their background therapy is. So they're saying if you're diagnosed with diabetes, when you have a heart attack, for instance, you have heart disease, you have diabetes, you should be on a GLP-1. It doesn't matter what else you're on.
Hmm.
Most people would start a patient with new diabetes, new type 2 diabetes on metformin because it's dirt cheap and has been around forever.
Right.
The SGLT2 inhibitors, that other class of drugs that we talked about earlier, are quite attractive as well. And so some people would use that kind of pill that doesn't require any kind of special taking. Me personally, if I had diabetes, I would want to take a GLP-1 receptor agonist because most people with diabetes are also substantially overweight, and these are the most effective weight loss drugs, in addition to being the most effective blood sugar regulating drugs. But it's not a for sure for everyone.
Right.
Oral Rybelsus, though, is the only oral GLP-1 receptor agonist available today. There is another one that's being developed by Eli Lilly that could be available early next year, but it'll be a while before we know about its cardiovascular effects.
Right. Now, do the cardiovascular benefits from Rybelsus, which we just discussed, do they also happen with Ozempic and Wegovy? Because these are all basically the same drug, as you mentioned. They're all made by Novo Nordisk. So do patients who don't want to take Rybelsus for various reasons, can they take Ozempic and Wegovy and get the
Yeah.
same cardiovascular benefits? Has that
Yes.
been shown in clinical trials also?
Yes, so Ozempic was shown in a previous clinical trial to reduce cardiovascular risk in in one of those small safety studies, and um, um, Wegovy, which is the obesity formulation, is was studied in the SELECT trial, which I think in the introduction you mentioned is something else that you want to talk
Yeah,
about.
we're
But
going to talk about it in a
does
minute. Right.
yeah, that's the SELECT is the obesity cardiovascular disease study for Wegovy.
Right. Now, the Lilly drugs that you mentioned, do they also have this cardiovascular advantage that's been proven with Rybelsus?
Yeah, that's the most recent, we call it disclosure in the business, the most recent clinical trial that was reported in September. It's still under review with a journal. It should come out in print soon, but it's been presented a couple of times. That was the so-called SURPASS cardiovascular outcome trial with tirzepatide in patients with diabetes and cardiovascular and kidney disease. So
So
that trial also uh, more complicated because instead of comparing to placebo, they did a very brave thing and compared it to Trulicity, another one of these drugs. It's been proven to have cardiovascular benefit before. And they showed that it was not inferior to Trulicity.
hmm,
Statistically, it wasn't quite to the point where you could say it's superior, but it was 8% better than. So, uh, effectively, I think tirzepatide uh, has a great track record for cardiovascular disease and kidney disease, like Ozempic. They don't yet have an FDA decision on that, so
I
the
see.
the formal decision isn't out yet. But I expect it will come. It may take 6 months.
Right. So Rybelsus has that official FDA approval. The other ones probably will get it in the future.
Right. So
Mm,
Trulicity, the one that Mounjaro compared to, does have it. Ozempic has it. Wegovy has it. Rybelsus has it.
okay.
Victoza also has it.
All right. Now, you mentioned several different drugs, five of the most popular ones. How do you decide what to put the patient on? Let's say they have diabetes, they're overweight, they're at risk for heart attack, strokes. Do you start with Rybelsus or Wegovy, or do you tell the patient the pros and cons and so on and let them decide?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in telling people the pros and cons. And part of that is I think when patients make the decision about the drugs that they're on, they're kind of more invested in it to begin with. They feel like they had some say in it. And at least my experience is that patients that I put on drugs tend to stay on drugs in the long run. And I try to kind of put myself in the patient's shoes and think about what they may want. So some people already at baseline have a fair number of GI complaints. They're gassy or they're bloated or, whatever symptoms they have. Um, one nice thing about Ozempic is you can do this thing called microdosing. There are
Hmm.
clicks in the pen, so you take these little tiny doses, and when you go up really, really slowly on doses, that is the best tolerated way to go. So in people with lots of GI overlay, we may do that. Or the Bydureon is one that's been around for a while that also has a very slow release pattern from its injection site. And that one also has a much better GI profile. Um, Frankly, tirzepatide, Mounjaro, Zepbound is the obesity formulation. That's the most powerful one out there. So if someone is really heavy, we might start with that one. It doesn't have quite the track record that Ozempic does,
Right.
Ozempic and Wegovy. So if they're concerned about how safe the drug is, how long it's been around, that's much less of an issue now that we have that tirzepatide cardiovascular outcome trial. But in any case, so some people would start on Ozempic, and then if they really needed more, we would switch to tirzepatide. So there are things that you can say that are nice about all the drugs, and frankly, in the United States now, uh, often it's your insurance company that tells you which drug you
Right.
use.
Right. You mentioned it briefly before. I noticed there's TV and internet ads for these GLP-1 drugs that are not the originals made by Novo Nordisk. Are those safe to use? Are they the same thing? And how do companies sell them to the public if they're not FDA approved? All the Novo Nordisk drugs are FDA approved. They've gone through clinical trials. The companies spend, tens of millions of dollars studying them. The FDA reviews it. And then these companies that I never heard of advertise these drugs on TV and people buy them. How does that happen?
Yeah, it's actually gotten even more complicated. So
Hmm.
it used to be that if you saw an ad and it wasn't from Lilly or Novo, it was compounded, which meant it's probably the chemical. And, for the most part, it seems like it's the right chemical made sort of in a bootleg way,
Hmm.
probably in a factory in China, not to be disparaging about factories in China, just that that's where it comes from,
Really?
usually. And I think in some places the compounding pharmacy is extremely responsible and does its very best to ensure the safety of that product. But it's not the FDA's level of supervision and that kind of stuff. So there's some uncertainty with that. Now, some of those compounded or those companies that were selling compounded semaglutide or tirzepatide, now they have relationships with Lilly and Novo, so they may be giving you the real stuff. And you just have to do your due diligence about that
Wow.
now. So there are companies from which you can get uh, the the real tirzepatide, the real semaglutide, in a vial that will say, I mean, in a pen that'll say Wegovy, or Ozempic, or a vial, or a pen that says Zepbound or Mounjaro. So that's very likely the real stuff. Um, and the price is coming down. I don't know the full details of the very recent agreement with the White House that Novo and Lilly have had about prices. That hasn't quite been implemented. And I'm a little bit afraid they talked about a certain price for the starting dose, but I don't know whether that's going to be true for all the doses.
Right.
But the price is coming down. If you travel internationally, there, it's $100 to $200 a month in most countries around the world. So
Hmm.
I encourage people that do travel internationally to think about, getting a 3-month supply or a 6-month supply if they're overseas.
Wow.
In India, Ozempic is becoming generic, so it'll be
Hmm.
regulated by the Indian equivalent of the FDA. And my understanding is from colleagues over there that they have 30 companies teed up to make generic Ozempic for $10 a month.
Really?
So
Wow.
yeah, but it won't be generic in the United States, I think, until 2032.
Right. I guess they have
So
different patents in different countries and they
right,
last for different periods of time. I would think that getting drugs that are made in China, where you don't know who made it, what kind of lab, what kind of sterility they had, is kind of risky. Hopefully, this new agreement between the company and the government will reduce the price so that more people can benefit from the drug.
right. So
That,
I mean,
yeah.
I think there are highly ethical compounding pharmacies that have done a good job through this period. It's just very hard to tell one from the other.
Yeah, the average
And
person out there, though, doesn't know how to
they're not
do
going to
it.
know.
Right, they're not
And
going to.
some of them are not good. I mean, there have been some catastrophic problems with some of this compounded stuff.
Yeah, you don't want to take that chance. Now, I want to move on a little bit to, we discussed briefly the article in the Lancet Medical Journal, which is like the New England Journal of Medicine, which was published about 2 weeks ago on the SELECT trial. That was a huge trial that showed that injection weekly of 2.4 milligram of the semaglutide, which is Novo Nordisk's medication equivalent to Wegovy, reduced major adverse cardiovascular events in patients who were just overweight and obese, but didn't have diabetes. So, how does that happen? Why is just improving obesity or being overweight also reduce your cardiovascular risk?
Right. That is the billion-dollar question. That study originally was reported about a year ago, the primary result, with as I remember it, over 20% overall reduction in heart attack, stroke, and cardiovascular death.
Yeah,
So it's not because the diabetes is getting better, because these people did not have diabetes.
right.
Um, there is a small reduction in glucose, so there's a small reduction in blood pressure. There's a big reduction in weight. So the smart money was that it's weight. Weight is what's making the cardiovascular benefit. But what they showed in this study that you're referring to in the Lancet just very recently was that it wasn't either the baseline weight, so it didn't matter whether you were just overweight, a BMI of 27, or whether you were, you know, quite large, BMI of 35 or 40. That didn't affect whether you had the benefit from taking Wegovy. And it wasn't the amount of weight loss that seemed to drive it either. Um,
Hmm.
there has been uh, speculation and some data from animal models that the cardiovascular benefit of these drugs is really driven through independent mechanisms, inflammation, perhaps the stability of what we call plaques, or the sort of the ticking time bombs that are in your heart that sort of tear open and cause your arteries to block all of a sudden. That there may be basic biology that's being affected by GLP-1 in the heart directly. We don't really know, but what we now know is that the evidence that it's purely blood sugar lowering, that case has gotten weakened a lot. and that it's purely weight, that case has gotten weakened a lot. It's likely intrinsic to how GLP-1 works in the heart and in the vascular system in general.
It's interesting. Now, these drugs also help patients with kidney disease. Do we know what the mechanism is for that?
No. It's amazing how much we know, and at the same time, all you have to do is ask one or two questions and you get to, I don't know. So it's good for kidney disease. It's good for liver disease, the so-called MASH or metabolic associated liver dysfunction. It's good for knee pain and osteoarthritis. It's good for sleep apnea, this class of drugs. Um, Pretty much every 2 or 3 months, we get another study where it's been studied in some other condition. The study that's cooking right now that we're the most interested in, and we should hear about this month, is for mild cognitive impairment, early Alzheimer's disease. And then one where we don't have proof, but in Seoul, it looked like it's also good for what we call peripheral vascular disease. So people have
Hmm.
blockages in their legs, enhancing their ability to walk distances and to not have recurrent events. That's a relatively new one too. So very exciting. There are over 200 medical conditions that are associated with overweight and obesity. And so it really is possible that this class of drugs, and there's a tidal wave of development in this field with all kinds of other classes of drugs, but being able to attack obesity as a medical problem is a way of cutting the legs under chronic disease. I mean, everything from asthma and COPD to many forms of cancer, depression, anxiety, uh, we talked about heart disease, liver disease, kidney disease. It's very impressive, the spectrum of diseases that might get better with weight loss.
Seems like the common denominator is reducing fatty tissue or adipose tissue in the body. Maybe fat cells release some sort of toxin that's toxic to every organ in the body. And if you reduce the fat cell content or the number of cells, then every organ benefits, maybe.
Yeah, well, so fat cells are the site of inflammation, and so that's one of the reasons why that inflammation hypothesis is out there. But in the SELECT trial, it didn't matter how much fat you lost as far as the driver of cardiovascular disease.
Mm,
But it could be more subtle.
mhm.
In any case, it's unknown. And to me personally, it'd be great to know how it works because that way we could develop, new therapies that address that target. But I much rather know that it works than
Right,
know how it works.
right. Very important. Now, you mentioned before that you spend a lot of time talking to your patients, very important. How much time do you spend telling them about exercise and diet and lifestyle in combination with Rybelsus and Wegovy and Ozempic?
Yeah, I mention it at least in every visit. And the reason is, without the lifestyle effort, you can eat your way through any drug program. So,
Right.
we need to have we had to fetter uh, food intake and increase physical activity for good health in general. I mean, this is not specifically about diabetes or overweight obesity. And what I would say the kind of miracle to the GLP-1 receptor agonists is they will help you with diet. So, I was heavy almost my whole life. And I would lose 10 or 20 pounds. And by the end of my spree of being good, I'd find myself in front of the refrigerator or in front of the pantry, just gazing in there going, man, I got to eat something, but I can't eat something because I've eaten my calories for the day. It's called food noise. And it would get to be deafening after I would lose 15 or 20 pounds. And I take these drugs. I lost nearly 70 pounds and
Really?
I got no food noise. Um, so it's a lot easier to follow the lifestyle plan once, on these drugs than it was before. And it makes it more fun than it used to be. It used to sound just like nagging when you say, what do you have for breakfast? What do you have for lunch? What do you have for supper? What do you snack between meals? What do you drink with your meals? And then having to say, well, instead of having two sandwiches, could you have one? Could you switch to low-fat mayonnaise? Don't get the no-fat mayonnaise. It's terrible, but low-fat mayonnaise might help. So we used to always try and come up with one or two things that people would agree to do that would make a
Right.
difference. Um, I mean, it's still a valuable technique to know, but the truth of the matter is these GLP-1 drugs are much more powerful than willpower.
That's an excellent summary. Do you tell your patients that you took the drug? Because that would be super convincing if anybody who had doubts about it, and you say, look, I take this drug and it's awesome.
Well, you kind of have to when you lose this kind of weight, because otherwise people think you're dying. So my patients used to be really worried about me a couple of years ago or 3 years ago when I first started. Yeah, so I came clean. I overshare in general.
That's really that's funny because I run a lot, and sometimes before I run in competitions and races, I increase my mileage and I lose a lot of weight. And sometimes my patients ask my assistant, "Is he okay?"
Yeah, yeah.
So I know how you feel, but 70 pounds is a lot, but you're a living example that these drugs are very beneficial. That's great.
Yeah, and my blood pressure got better, my liver got better, everything, my triglycerides got better, my HDL got better. I mean, on paper, I'm like a healthy 20-year-old, even though I'm a not so healthy 67-year-old.
Well, you look, I don't, you don't look like you're 20, but I would go with 30 or something like that.
Oh, right, right.
You look awesome. Well, this has been extremely educational for me. I learned a lot, and I'm sure the public out there in the audience will love watching this and will learn a lot as well. So I really appreciate your taking the time from your busy day to share your knowledge and experience and expertise with us about these very important drugs.
Well, thank you. It's really been a pleasure having this chat.
Thank you.